Leo's eyes snapped open to the familiar popcorn ceiling of his old apartment, his body racked with phantom shivers that had nothing to do with the room's temperature. The memory of freezing, the slow, agonizing numbness that crept from fingertips to heart, clung to him like a second skin. He could still feel the ice crystals forming in his lungs, the final gasps of air that never reached his bloodstream. His hands trembled as he pushed himself up from the mattress, the cheap springs groaning beneath him. Sunlight streamed through the blinds, painting stripes of gold across the worn carpet. It was wrong. All wrong. He should be dead, buried under meters of ice in a world that had forgotten warmth. Instead, he was here, in this cramped studio apartment he'd lived in 10 years ago, before everything went to hell. His gaze dropped to his right hand, and there it was, a simple silver band on his index finger, cool to the touch. As he focused on it, the ring shimmered, and a translucent interface materialized before his eyes. Text scrolled in elegant, glowing script, infinite compliance ring, storage capacity, unlimited. Passive analysis, active. Welcome, user Leo. For a long moment, Leo just stared, his breath catching in his throat. This wasn't a dream. The cold memory was too vivid, too real. And this ring, he remembered whispers from his dying moments, something about cosmic rules and loopholes. Tentatively, he reached out with his mind toward the nearest object, a half-empty coffee mug on the nightstand. The interface flickered, highlighting the mug in a soft blue glow. A thought, and the mug vanished, appearing in a grid-like storage space within the ring's interface. No weight, no strain. Just infinite space. He stood, his legs unsteady, and swept his hand across the room. The bed, the nightstand, the cheap dresser, all vanished into the ring's storage. The apartment stood empty in seconds, save for Leo and the clothes on his back. A hysterical laugh bubbled in his chest. Infinite storage. He had infinite storage, and 10 years before the freeze. His mind raced. The global ice age had come without warning, temperatures plummeting overnight. Governments collapsed, resources vanished, and people died by the millions in the first week. He'd been one of them, huddled in a makeshift shelter with nothing but a few cans of food. Now, he had time. And this ring. As he paced the empty room, his eyes fell on a small mirror hanging crookedly on the wall, a cheap thing from a dollar store. The ring's interface pulsed, and text appeared, rule detected, breaking a mirror brings bad luck. Loophole analysis, rule only applies after sunset. Current time, 10:47 a.m. Exception available. Leo froze. Cosmic rules. The ring wasn't just for storage, it analyzed rules. He approached the mirror, his reflection pale and wide-eyed. With a deliberate motion, he yanked it from the wall and slammed it against the floor. Glass shattered, scattering across the bare floorboards. Nothing happened. No sudden chill, no ominous feeling. Just broken glass. But as the shard settled, the ring highlighted one particular piece, a larger fragment that had landed near the baseboard. Beneath it, the floorboard looked slightly warped. Leo knelt, brushing aside glass, and pried up the loose board. Inside, wrapped in cloth, were 10 gold bars, each stamped with a serial number. Someone's hidden stash, probably from a previous tenant. The ring's analysis had been right. A loophole in a mundane rule, and he'd gained a small fortune without consequence. He stored the gold instantly, the bars vanishing into the ring's infinite grid. This changed everything. The ring didn't just store things, it showed him how to navigate a world governed by bizarre laws. Laws he now knew were coming. Leo spent the next hours in a frenzy of activity. He pulled out his old laptop, the ring passively scanning every website he visited for hidden rules or traps. He listed everything he owned, the apartment lease, his beat-up car, the few stocks he'd dabbled in, for sale at fire sale prices. Emails flew to old contacts, offers too good to refuse. He sold his car to a dealership for half its value, transferred the lease to a desperate student, and liquidated every asset down to the last penny. His phone buzzed constantly. Friends confused by his sudden sales, family members worried about his rash decisions. He ignored them all, his responses curt. Needing cash fast, he'd text, or moving overseas. Let them think he'd lost his mind. In 10 years, none of it would matter. Reputation, social ties, they were luxuries for a world that wasn't about to freeze solid. By evening, he had transferred over $2 million into his accounts, the gold bars adding a hefty sum. The ring had flagged several online transactions as potentially risky. Rule: third refund in a month summons a debt collector, so he avoided returns, accepting losses where needed. Every decision was filtered through the ring's passive analysis, a constant hum of information at the edge of his awareness. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Leo drove a rented truck toward an industrial warehouse on the city's outskirts, his first bulk purchase, 5 tons of non-perishable food, medical supplies, and water purification tablets, waiting for pickup. The roads were quiet, streetlights flickering to life. His mind was already planning the next steps: luxury bunker designs, geothermal heating systems, weapons, fuel. 10 years of hoarding, with infinite space to store it all. Then the truck's radio crackled, cutting through his thoughts. A news bulletin, the announcer's voice tense. Reports of unexplained frost forming in several tropical regions, including the Amazon rainforest and Southeast Asia. Scientists are baffled, citing temperatures dropping rapidly in localized areas. No explanation yet. Leo's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Too early. The freeze wasn't supposed to start for years, but here were the first signs: frost where frost shouldn't be. His heart hammered against his ribs. Had his rebirth changed something? Or was this just the precursor, the world's systems already buckling under cosmic rules he didn't yet understand? As he pulled into the warehouse lot, the ring on his finger pulsed, a warm thrum that spread up his arm. The interface flashed red, new text scrolling urgently: cosmic rule detected, whispering to ice attracts attention. Analysis: active in vicinity. Threat level, elevated. Recommend avoidance or loophole exploitation. Leo killed the engine, sitting in the dark cab. Outside, the warehouse loomed, its metal walls gleaming under security lights. From within, he could hear faint sounds, voices, maybe, but distorted, like echoes through ice. And beneath that, a softer noise, like someone whispering secrets to a frozen pane. The ring's alert glowed persistently, a warning written in light. Attention was being attracted. And in this new world, attention could mean frost wraiths, shadows, or worse. He had his first bulk purchase waiting, but now the rules were already here, twisting reality around him. He took a slow breath, the memory of freezing death sharp in his mind, and reached for the door handle. The warehouse door groaned as Leo pushed it open, the scent of dust and cold metal filling his nostrils. Outside, the news report from his car radio still echoed in his mind: tropical frost in Brazil, ice forming on palm trees in Florida. He pushed the thoughts aside like clearing cobwebs. 10 years. He had 10 years, and right now, the only thing that mattered was the warehouse floor stretching before him, stacked high with pallets of canned goods, their labels promising years of sustenance. His fingers brushed against the infinite compliance ring on his left hand, the silver band cool against his skin. It hummed faintly, a sensation only he could feel, as he approached the first pallet. With a thought, the ring activated, and the entire stack of canned beans, 500 cases, each containing 24 cans, vanished into the infinite storage space. No flash of light, no dramatic effect, just a silent disappearance that left the concrete floor bare. The ring's passive analysis logged the item automatically: canned beans, 12,000 units, stored at optimal temperature. Leo didn't need to check, he felt the information flow into his mind, a steady stream of data about his hoard. He moved methodically, aisle by aisle. Canned vegetables, fruits, meats, each pallet disappeared into the ring's void. His thoughts raced with calculations. $2 million from liquidating his assets, every penny earmarked for survival. He'd sold his apartment, his car, even the sentimental junk he'd accumulated over a lifetime. Friends had called, concerned, but he'd hung up without explanation. Their voices were ghosts from a future where they'd all frozen, their pleas for help unanswered. Now, in this warehouse under the fluorescent lights that buzzed like angry insects, he focused on the tangible: the weight of supplies, the security of numbers. The ring's analysis flared as he reached the generators. A cosmic rule shimmered in his perception: buyer beware, deceit in daylight bears no penalty, but truth under moonlight binds. He paused, his hand hovering over a diesel generator. The rule was vague, like all of them, bizarre edicts that governed this new reality creeping into the world. He'd already seen it with the mirror and the gold bars. Here, it meant nothing yet, but he filed it away, a tool waiting to be used. He loaded 50 generators, each capable of powering a small house, then moved to fuel drums. The scent of diesel oil hung thick in the air, mixing with the dust. He took 200 drums, each holding 55 gallons. The ring stored them without strain, its infinite capacity a comforting presence. Next came bunker materials, reinforced steel beams, concrete mix, insulation panels, and air filtration systems. He worked for hours, the warehouse emptying around him like a carcass picked clean. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the chill seeping through the walls. Early frost, the news had said. He ignored it, his mind fixed on the list: water purification tablets, medical kits, seeds for hydroponics, luxury items like coffee beans and chocolate bars. He took it all, the ring humming with each acquisition. By afternoon, the warehouse was a hollow shell. Leo drove to the next supplier, a construction equipment dealer on the city's outskirts. The sky had turned a leaden gray, clouds gathering like bruised flesh. He parked his truck, a used model he'd bought for cash, and stepped out. The dealer, a man named Carl with a greasy smile and eyes that darted like startled birds, greeted him with a handshake that felt too eager. "Leo, right? Heard you're buying big," Carl said, leading him to a row of industrial heaters. "These babies'll keep you warm in any storm. Top of the line." Leo's ring pulsed. A notification appeared in his mind: equipment flaw detected, faulty wiring in heating elements. Supplier awareness, high. He kept his face neutral, examining the heater. The metal casing was pristine, but the ring's analysis delved deeper, highlighting the defect in red. Carl was trying to scam him, selling junk at premium prices. Anger simmered in Leo's gut, but he quashed it. Emotion was a luxury he couldn't afford. Instead, he thought of the rule: buyer beware. Daylight deceit bore no penalty. But under moonlight. "I'll take 20, Leo said, his voice flat. "And the solar panels over there." Carl's smile widened. "Smart man. Let's shake on it, verbal agreement, best kind." They agreed on a price, Carl's words smooth as oil. Leo waited, letting the conversation unfold. He mentioned delivery to a remote site, coordinates he'd chosen for his bunker. Carl nodded, promising everything by week's end. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Leo made his move. He pulled out a voice recorder, a small device he bought for this purpose. The moon, a pale sliver, rose above the horizon. "Just to confirm, Carl," Leo said, holding the recorder. 20 heaters, fully functional, and 50 solar panels, delivered to the coordinates. "No defects, right?" Carl, eager to close the deal, chuckled. "Of course, all perfect. My word on it." The ring glowed softly, a blue light only Leo could see. The rule: verbal contracts bind under moonlight activated, its loophole unfolding in his mind: in lunar-lit agreements, deceit voids the contract and compels restitution. He'd recorded the conversation, capturing Carl's promise under the moon's light. The cosmic law latched onto the words, binding them with invisible force. 2 days later, at the bunker site, a secluded valley surrounded by pine forests, the delivery arrived. Carl's trucks rolled in, but when Leo tested the heaters, they sparked and died. The solar panels had cracked cells. Carl stood nearby, smirking. "Buyer beware, pal. Should have checked." Leo played the recording. As the words echoed in the cold air, the ring's analysis flared. The rule enforced itself. Carl's smirk vanished, replaced by confusion, then dread. His body stiffened, movements jerky as if pulled by strings. He barked orders to his crew, unloading replacement equipment, premium models, flawless and expensive. They worked in a daze, driven by the cosmic compulsion. Leo watched, cold satisfaction settling in his chest. He didn't pay a cent extra. The loophole had turned the scam against its perpetrator. With the supplies secured, Leo began construction. The bunker site was a hive of activity, workers he'd hired with cash, no names exchanged, no questions asked. He supervised everything, using the ring to store excess materials and tools. The design was his own, a luxury sanctuary buried deep underground, with reinforced walls, geothermal heating, and hydroponic gardens. He worked around the clock, sleeping in short bursts, his dreams filled with ice and the ring's glow. The world outside continued its slow freeze, news reports spoke of strange frost patterns, unexplained cold snaps. He ignored them, focusing on welding steel, pouring concrete, installing systems. Weeks blurred into months. The bunker took shape, a multi-level fortress with living quarters, storage rooms, and a command center. Leo stocked it with everything from books to wine, the ring's infinite space swallowing it all. He thought of Kale, the survivor from his memories, a man who whispered to ice, attracting monsters. He'd be out there soon, a threat lurking in the frozen waste. But for now, Leo had walls, supplies, and the ring's analysis. On the final day, as the last layer of insulation was sealed, the sky darkened. Clouds thickened, swirling like agitated ghosts. Leo stood outside, surveying his work. The bunker entrance was hidden beneath a false rock formation, nearly invisible. A chill wind picked up, biting through his jacket. He turned to go inside, but the ring flashed, a violent pulse of light. Multiple alerts flooded his mind: rule detected, whispering to ice attracts attention, active nearby. Rule detected, third shadow in a week claims a soul, threshold approaching. And one new, stark warning: first snowfall demands a sacrifice of warmth. He looked up. Snow began to fall, not gentle flakes but a sudden, furious blizzard. White descended in sheets, swallowing the landscape. The temperature plummeted, his breath frosting in the air. The ring's glow intensified, casting eerie blue shadows on the snow. The rule demanded a sacrifice of warmth. What did that mean? His body heat? The bunker's systems? He had seconds to decide, the blizzard roaring around him, the cold seeping into his bones. The world outside Leo's bunker had become a symphony of ice and death. Inside the reinforced steel walls, surrounded by the hum of geothermal generators and the soft glow of LED panels, he watched satellite feeds flicker across multiple monitors. Cities that had once pulsed with life now lay frozen under crystalline blankets. Tokyo's skyscrapers glittered like jagged icicles, New York streets were rivers of solid white, and London's bridges sagged under impossible weights of frost. The temperature reading scrolled in the corner of his screens: -40 degrees Celsius in temperate zones, -60 degrees Celsius near the poles, and dropping by the hour. Leo leaned back in his ergonomic chair, fingers tracing the cool metal of the infinite compliance ring on his left hand. It had begun glowing faintly blue an hour ago, its passive analysis activating as the freeze accelerated. On his primary monitor, a feed from an exterior thermal camera showed the barren landscape around his bunker, a desolate expanse of snowdrifts that reached halfway up the entrance blast door, with only the occasional skeletal tree breaking the monotony of white. His breath fogged slightly in the bunker's perfectly climate-controlled air, set to a comfortable 22 degrees Celsius, a stark contrast to the death outside. His thoughts drifted to the supplies stacked in the ring's infinite space: mountains of canned goods, pallets of medical supplies, rows of fuel barrels, and the luxury items he'd hoarded: fine wines, imported chocolates, even a collection of vintage board games. All meticulously organized through mental commands to the ring. But now, as he watched a feed from a surviving weather satellite, he realized the hoarding had been only half the battle. The other half was understanding the rules that now governed this frozen reality. A notification pinged on his console. The ring had detected another cosmic rule activation nearby. Text shimmered in his vision, projected by the ring's passive analysis: first snowfall demands a sacrifice of warmth. The rule he'd seen flash during the blizzard as he sealed the bunker. He'd ignored it then, focused on securing his sanctuary, but now it demanded attention. On a secondary monitor, he pulled up footage from perimeter cameras. 3 figures, survivors, by their ragged parkas and desperate movements, stumbled through the deepening snow about 200 meters from his bunker. Their thermal signatures showed rapidly dropping body temperatures. One of them collapsed. Leo zoomed the camera. The man's face was visible through frost-rimed goggles, lips blue, skin pale with the telltale waxy sheen of severe frostbite. He wasn't getting up. The other 2 tried to drag him, but their movements grew sluggish. The ring's analysis updated: rule violation detected, first snowfall demands a sacrifice of warmth. Penalty: progressive hypothermia. Leo stood, pacing the command center's rubberized floor. The rule text floated persistently in his mind's eye. He focused on it, and the ring responded: highlighted clauses appeared: glowing gold against the blue text. The main edict stated that the first significant snowfall in any location demanded a symbolic offering of warmth from those present, or they would suffer escalating cold until death. But the loophole shimmered: if one offers a symbolic item of heat before the snow touches bare skin, the demand is satisfied without penalty. Acceptable items include lit match, burning ember, activated hand warmer. He hadn't been outside during the first snowfall, he'd been inside the bunker as the blizzard hit. But the rules seemed to consider the bunker's location as present for the demand. Or perhaps it was because he'd been sealing the entrance as snow began to fall. The ring didn't clarify the exact parameters, only the exploitable exception. Decision made, Leo moved to the airlock chamber. He cycled through the inner door, the heavy mechanism hissing as pressure equalized. The outer door remained sealed, but a small observation port allowed him to see the snow piled against it. From a storage locker, he retrieved a simple matchbox, part of his emergency fire-starting supplies. He struck a match against the rough strip, the sulfur sent sharp in the sterile air. The flame danced, small but defiantly warm. Holding it before the observation port, he spoke aloud, though no one could hear, "I offer this symbol of heat to satisfy the demand of the first snowfall." The words felt foolish, but the ring's analysis had indicated verbal acknowledgement might strengthen the loophole's application. The match burned down to his fingers, and he dropped it into a metal dish, watching the last ember die. Immediately, the ring's glow shifted from warning blue to neutral white. The rule notification vanished from his vision. On the monitor showing the perimeter, the two surviving figures still struggled, but now a new detail appeared: their thermal signature stabilized slightly. Not warming, but no longer plummeting. The rule's penalty had been satisfied for this location. They might still freeze from ordinary cold, but not from the cosmic enforcement. Leo returned to the command center, thoughts racing. He pulled up a dedicated database on his main computer, one he prepared during bunker construction for cataloging anomalies. Now he began entering the cosmic rules he'd encountered. Breaking a mirror brings bad luck, with its sunset loophole. Whispering to ice attracts attention, still only partially understood. Buyer beware, with its moonlight verbal contract clause. And now, first snowfall demands a sacrifice of warmth, with its symbolic offering exception. As he typed, the ring occasionally pulsed, adding footnotes to his entries. It didn't provide full explanations, only highlighted what could be exploited. The rules weren't consistent, some demanded specific actions, others triggered on conditions, all with bizarre specificity. But they governed reality now. The freezing temperatures were just the environment, the rules were the true threat. Hours passed. Leo monitored news feeds, what few remained. A station in Norway broadcast until the signal cut to static mid-sentence. A Chinese satellite relay showed entire provinces darkening as power grids failed. Everywhere, people were dying not just from cold, but from unknowable violations. A report from Australia mentioned survivors who'd laughed during a hailstorm being found frozen solid with smiles still on their faces, likely another rule. The ring confirmed with a faint pulse when he read that account. He ate a meal of reheated lasagna from his stores, the normalcy of the act surreal against the backdrop of global collapse. The bunker's systems hummed reassuringly, air filtration, water recycling, power generation all operating at optimal levels. He'd prepared well. But preparation alone wouldn't save him from a rule he didn't understand. As evening approached according to the bunker's artificial day-night cycle, Leo switched to the exterior camera feeds for a final check before his scheduled sleep period. The two survivors he'd seen earlier were gone, either moved on or buried under fresh snow. The landscape lay still under a moonless sky, the stars hidden by high ice clouds. Then movement caught his eye on the eastern perimeter feed. He zoomed in. 4 figures this time, moving with more purpose than the earlier stragglers. They wore better gear, military surplus winter camouflage, proper snowshoes. One carried what looked like a hunting rifle. They approached from downwind, using the terrain for cover, heading directly toward his bunker's entrance. Leo's hand went to the ring. It began glowing blue again, brighter than before. Text shimmered in his vision, rule breaker detected, eldritch entity approaching. He focused on the lead figure. The man was tall, moving with a strange, fluid grace despite the deep snow. His face was partially hidden by a fur-lined hood, but his mouth moved constantly, lips forming silent words. As he passed a particularly large ice formation, he paused, leaned close to the frozen surface, and his whispering became audible through the camera's enhanced audio pickup, a low, rhythmic murmur that made the ice itself seem to vibrate. The ring's analysis updated, whispering to ice attracts attention. Violation in progress. Entity summoning likely. The man looked up suddenly, as if sensing observation. His hood fell back slightly, revealing sharp features and eyes that gleamed with unnatural awareness even through the camera feed. He gestured to his companions, pointing directly at the bunker's concealed entrance. They spread out, taking defensive positions. Leo's breath caught. This wasn't random survivors seeking shelter. This was a coordinated approach by someone who knew about the bunker, or at least suspected something was here. And the whispering. The ring had warned about that rule in Chapter 1, but he'd never seen it actively triggered. As he watched, frost began to swirl around the whispering man's feet, not blown by wind but moving with deliberate purpose. The temperature reading on that camera feed dropped another 10 degrees in seconds. Shadows lengthened unnaturally, stretching from ice formations toward the group. Then the ring pulsed urgently, and new text appeared, glowing crimson, multiple rule violations converging. Frost Wraith manifestation imminent. Shadow entity detected in vicinity. On the screen, the whispering man, Kale, Leo realized with sudden certainty, matching the description from his ring's stored data, smiled, a cold expression that held no warmth at all. He raised a hand, and the ice around him cracked with sounds like breaking bones. The blizzard had settled into a persistent, howling wind that scraped against the reinforced titanium walls of Leo's bunker. Inside, the air was a controlled 22 degrees Celsius, scented faintly of pine from the air filtration system. Leo stood before the bank of monitors, his reflection ghostly in the darkened glass. The 4 survivors had made camp about 300 meters from his entrance, huddled around a struggling fire that spat orange sparks into the swirling snow. Their leader was unmistakable. The man named Kale, his face gaunt and etched with frostbite scars, knelt by a patch of exposed ice. Even through the thermal cameras, Leo could see the man's lips moving, forming words that carried no sound to the bunker. But the ice responded. It didn't just crackle, it seemed to breathe, exhaling plumes of frost that coiled like living things. Shadows around the campfire, which should have been static in the firelight, began to writhe. They stretched and contracted, pulling away from the flames as if repelled. Leo's left hand, where the infinite compliance ring rested, grew warm. A soft, silver-blue light emanated from the band, casting faint patterns on the control console. Text scrolled across his vision, visible only to him, rule detected, whispering to ice attracts attention. Below it, in smaller, intricate script, the ring's analysis unfolded. Asterisk primary clause, vocalizations directed at frozen surfaces with intent summon frost-aligned entities. Loophole identified, attraction can be nullified if the whisper is echoed with a precise counterfrequency, 87.3 Hz plus or minus 0.5, before entity manifestation completes. Technological amplification permitted under subclause 4G**. He watched, fascinated and repelled, as the ice near Kale bulged. Something pale and elongated pushed through, not breaking the surface so much as flowing out of it. A frost wraith. It stood roughly humanoid, but its form was a shifting sculpture of rime and darkness, with eyes like chips of black obsidian. It turned its head slowly, scanning the camp. A second wraith began to emerge nearby. The other survivors, 2 men and a woman, backed away, their faces masks of terror. One fumbled with a makeshift spear, its tip trembling. Kale didn't stop whispering. He seemed to be chanting now, his breath frosting in the air, his eyes fixed on the wraiths as if commanding them. But Leo saw the uncertainty in the man's posture, the slight tremor in his hands. This wasn't control, it was a desperate gambit, a broken interpretation of a rule he didn't fully understand. The ring confirmed it, flashing a secondary alert, asterisk multiple rule violations converging. Hostile intent detected. Entity aggression escalating, asterisk. Leo considered doing nothing. Let the wraiths claim them. They were a threat, camped at his doorstep. But curiosity warred with caution. The ring had given him a tool, a loophole. Testing it here, from the safety of his bunker, was low risk. And understanding how these rules interacted could be invaluable. He moved to the bunker's environmental control station, a sleek panel of touchscreens and physical dials. His sound system was military-grade, designed for both communication and psychological operations. He called up the frequency generator, his fingers dancing over the interface. Setting it to 87.3 Hz, he routed it through the external speakers, which were disguised as rock formations near the bunker entrance. He modulated the output to match the cadence of Kale's whispers, which the external microphones were picking up as distorted, rhythmic pulses. With a deep breath, he activated the broadcast. The sound was subaudible, a deep thrum that vibrated through the bunker floor. Outside, the effect was immediate. The writhing shadows froze mid-motion. The frost wraiths, which had been advancing on the terrified survivors, halted. Their obsidian eyes seemed to lose focus. The modulated frequency washed over them, and Leo watched as the very air around the entities shimmered, like heat haze over ice. The wraiths dissolved, not in a burst of violence, but as if unraveling. They flowed back into the ice from which they came, leaving only smooth, unmarked frost. The survivors stared, dumbfounded. The fire crackled, suddenly the loudest sound. Kale staggered to his feet, his chanting cut off. He turned slowly, his gaze sweeping the landscape before locking onto the bunker entrance. Even through the camera, Leo could see the man's eyes widen with a mix of awe and avarice. Kale knew. He knew the dispersion hadn't been natural. It had come from the bunker. Within minutes, Kale was at the primary airlock, pounding on the reinforced door. The thuds were dull, heavy things, transmitted through the bunker's sensors. Leo watched on the door camera feed. Kale's face was pressed close to the lens, his breath fogging it. "Open up." Kale's voice was raspy, amplified by the intercom Leo had reluctantly activated. "You have power here. Technology. You saw what you did. We need shelter." Leo remained silent, observing. The other survivors hung back, looking exhausted and hopeful. "We have information." Kale insisted, his voice rising. "Rules we've learned. The whispers, they can be controlled. I can show you. Let us in." His tone shifted, becoming wheedling. "Hospitality. In this frozen hell, we share what we have." At the word hospitality, Leo's ring warmed again. New text scrolled, rule detected, hospitality requires mutual consent. The analysis followed. Asterisk primary clause, offering or demanding shelter invokes cosmic reciprocity. Loophole identified, consent must be explicit and bilateral. Unilateral demand voids obligation. Sealing entry while stating refusal reinforces boundary under exception 7, c, asterisk. Leo leaned toward the intercom. His voice, when it came, was calm, filtered slightly by the system. "I refuse." He spoke clearly, ensuring the microphones picked it up. Then he engaged the secondary security protocols. Hydraulic locks thudded into place within the doorframe. Magnetic seals activated with a low hum. The bunker entrance wasn't just closed, it was cosmically sealed, the rule acknowledging his explicit denial of consent. Kale's face twisted in fury. He slammed a fist against the door again, but the sound was muffled now, distant. "You'll regret this. The ice listens. It remembers." He spat the words, then turned, barking orders at his group. They began setting up a more permanent-looking camp, dragging salvaged tarps and broken furniture into a rough semicircle. They were digging in. Leo spent the next few hours observing them through the cameras. He saw Kale attempting to whisper to the ice again, but the results were feeble, only minor frost disturbances, no wraiths. The man was following broken interpretations, perhaps half-remembered fragments of rules gleaned from others' deaths. His group moved with a tense, paranoid energy. They argued over rations, a few cans of food they'd scavenged. Leo watched the woman, who seemed younger than the others, try to tend to a man with a worsening cough. Their resources were pitiful. As dusk deepened into a starless, moonless night, the temperature on the external sensors plummeted to -40. The survivors' fire guttered, unable to fight the cold. They huddled together under tarps, shivering violently. Leo sat in his command chair, a cup of hot coffee steaming in his hand. The luxury of his bunker, the soft lighting, the hum of efficient heaters, the stocked pantry just meters away, felt almost surreal contrasted with the suffering outside. He felt no pity, not exactly. It was a cold, analytical assessment. They were variables. Hostile variables currently neutralized by the rules and his defenses. Then, near midnight, the shadows began to coalesce. It started around Kale, who sat apart from the others, muttering to himself. The weak firelight cast his shadow long and distorted against the ice. But the shadow moved independently. It thickened, drinking in the darkness around it. It pulled away from Kale's body, rising like a stain of pure blackness from the snow. It wasn't a wraith. It was something denser, more profound. A formless mass of darkness that seemed to absorb light and sound. Leo's ring burned against his skin, a sudden, sharp heat. He looked down. The silver-blue light was pulsing rapidly. New text scrawled across his vision, the letters edged in crimson, rule detected, third shadow in a week claims a soul. The analysis was brief, stark. Asterisk primary clause, upon the third independent manifestation of a shadow entity linked to a single consciousness within a 7-day cycle, that entity may claim the consciousness as essence. No known loophole detected. Manifestation in progress asterisk. Leo's breath caught. He zoomed the camera in. The shadow had fully detached from Kale. It hovered in the air, a blot of emptiness. Kale had finally stopped muttering. He was staring at the thing, his face pale with a terror deeper than any he'd shown the Wraiths. He tried to scramble back, but his movements were sluggish, frozen. The shadow did not attack. It simply waited. It pulsed slowly, as if breathing. And Leo knew, with a certainty that chilled him more than the external cold, that this was Kale's third shadow this week. The failed whispers, the broken rules, they had all been counting toward this. In the bunker's warmth, Leo watched the prelude to a cosmic claim, his rings light the only illumination in the dark control room, the words of the new rule hanging in his mind, unresolved and utterly final. The shadow clung to Kale like a second skin, a patch of deeper darkness that moved independently of the campfire's flickering light. Leo watched through his bunker's thermal cameras, the feeds showing in crisp detail on the wall-sized monitor in his control room. The entity wasn't a solid thing, it was an absence, a void that drank the warmth from everything it touched. Outside, the temperature had dropped to -40°C. The wind howled across the frozen landscape, carrying ice crystals that scraped against Leo's reinforced bunker walls like skeletal fingers. Kale's camp consisted of 3 makeshift shelters cobbled together from salvaged metal and insulated fabric, huddled around a struggling fire that cast long, dancing shadows. There were 5 of them left now, Kale and 4 others, their thermal signatures showing as pale orange blobs against the deep blue of the frozen ground. Leo leaned back in his ergonomic chair, the leather creaking softly. His infinite compliance ring glowed with a steady amber light on his finger, its surface cool against his skin. On the monitor, text scrolled in a sidebar, the ring's analysis of the unfolding situation. Rule detected, third shadow in a week claims a soul. Status, active. Violator, Kale, survivor group leader. Shadow count, 3/3. Claim imminent, 12 hours remaining. Below that, smaller alerts blinked. Minor rule violations detected in camp asterisk. Walking backward after sunset summons misfortune, violated by survivor number 3, 1842. Breaking ice with bare hands invites frostbite spirits, violated by survivor number 2, 1915. Speaking names in whispers weakens bonds, violated by Kale, ongoing. The shadow moved. It detached from Kale's form like oil sliding off water, flowing across the frozen ground toward survivor number 3, a woman who had been pacing nervously backward earlier. Leo watched as the thermal signature of her feet suddenly turned from orange to deep blue. She stumbled, her mouth opening in a silent scream on the camera feed. Frost crawled up her legs, not the natural frost of the environment but something faster, more purposeful. It reached her waist, her chest, her throat. Within 30 seconds, her thermal signature vanished entirely, leaving only a human-shaped void in the infrared spectrum. The remaining survivors scrambled away from the spot where she had stood. Kale shouted something, his breath visible as white vapor even in the thermal imaging. He gestured wildly, and Leo's ring pulsed with another alert. Rule triggered, anger spoken to wind carries further. Effect, amplifies emotional resonance within 50 meters. Leo could almost feel the frustration radiating from the camp. He took a sip of hot coffee from his insulated mug, the rich aroma filling the control room. His bunker hummed around him, the steady thrum of geothermal generators, the whisper of air filtration systems, the soft glow of LED lighting that mimicked natural daylight. Outside, people were dying from rules they didn't understand. Inside, he was warm, safe, and analyzing those same rules for weaknesses. His ring flashed again, this time with new text scrolling alongside the ongoing analysis of the third shadow rule. Loophole detected, voluntary soul offering redirects claim. Conditions asterisk. 1. Soul must be offered willingly before third night of shadow attachment. 2. Offering must be verbal and witnessed. 3. Redirected claim dissipates shadow for 24 hours. Warning, loophole does not prevent future shadow attachments. Leo considered the information. The loophole was clear: if Kale could convince someone to sacrifice themselves before midnight, the shadow would take that soul instead of his. But would Kale figure it out? The man followed broken interpretations of cosmic rules, whispering to ice and attracting frost wraiths. He might not see this particular exception. On the monitor, the shadow had returned to Kale, wrapping around him like a cloak. Survivor number 2, a man with a heavily bandaged hand from earlier icebreaking, tried to approach Kale with what looked like a makeshift weapon. As he raised it, the shadow extended a tendril. The man's bandaged hand turned black, the frostbite spreading up his arm in seconds. He collapsed, his thermal signature fading to nothing. 3 left. Leo's fingers tapped against the armrest of his chair. He didn't owe these people anything. They were hostile, had demanded entry to his bunker, followed dangerous rule interpretations that threatened everyone around them. And yet, the ring's analysis showed something interesting. The shadow entity, while claiming souls, was also absorbing the minor rule violations from the camp. Each death seemed to saturate it with the broken cosmic energy of the violations. Leo wondered if that accumulation might make it more dangerous later, perhaps even capable of affecting his bunker despite its defenses. He made a decision. Rising from his chair, Leo walked to the drone control station. His bunker housed 6 surveillance drones, each equipped with thermal cameras, audio pickups, and small cargo bays. He selected drone number 3, its status showing fully charged and ready. The launch bay hissed open, revealing the frozen landscape beyond through reinforced glass. With practiced movements, Leo programmed a simple flight path to drop a payload near Kale's camp. From a drawer, he took a sheet of waterproof paper and a permanent marker. The paper was part of his hoard, billions of supplies included stationery of all kinds. He wrote in clear block letters. Third shadow rule, voluntary soul offering redirects claim. Offer must be willing, verbal, witnessed. Before midnight. He didn't sign it. He didn't need to. Kale would know where it came from. Folding the paper twice, Leo placed it in the drone's cargo bay. The bay closed with a soft click. On the monitor, he watched as drone number 3 lifted from its charging pad, its rotors barely audible through the bunker's soundproofing. It slipped through the launch bay door and into the howling wind outside. The drone's camera feed showed the world in shades of gray and white. Snow swirled in vicious eddies, ice coated every surface, and the sky was the color of bruised flesh. It flew low, avoiding the worst of the wind, until it reached Kale's camp. The survivors had retreated to their shelters, but Kale stood outside, staring at the shadow wrapped around him. His breath came in ragged puffs of white. Drone number 3 descended to 10 meters above the ground. The cargo bay opened. The folded paper fluttered down, caught by the wind for a moment before landing in the snow 2 meters from Kale's feet. Kale stared at it. He looked up, searching for the drone, but Leo had already recalled it, sending it on a circuitous route back to the bunker. After a long moment, Kale bent and picked up the paper. He unfolded it, his eyes scanning the words. Leo watched through the camp's perimeter camera as Kale's expression shifted from confusion to understanding to something darker. The man turned to the remaining shelters. He called out, his voice carrying on the wind. The 2 other survivors emerged, a man and a woman, both wrapped in multiple layers of clothing, their faces pale with cold and fear. Kale showed them the paper. He spoke, gesturing first to the shadow around him, then to them. Leo couldn't hear the words through the howling wind, but he didn't need to. The body language told the story. The woman shook her head violently, backing away. The man hesitated, looking between Kale and the shadow. Kale spoke again, more urgently this time. He pointed to the bunker in the distance, its smooth metal dome just visible through the snow. He gestured to the supplies they had, meager rations, damaged equipment. He was making a case. Leo returned to his main monitor, calling up the ring's ongoing analysis. The third shadow rule still showed as active, but now a timer had appeared, claim deadline, 3 hours, 42 minutes. The shadow around Kale seemed to pulse in time with the countdown. Outside, the argument continued. The woman turned and ran, stumbling through the snow toward the frozen wilderness. She didn't get far. As she crossed an area where ice had formed strange, geometric patterns, Leo's ring flashed another alert. Rule violated, crossing fractal ice without counting steps summons the cold. The woman's footsteps faltered. She looked down at the ice, then up in panic. Frost erupted from the patterns, climbing her legs, her torso, her face. Within seconds, she was a statue of ice, frozen in mid-stride, her expression forever locked in terror. One left. Kale and the remaining survivor, the man, stared at the ice statue. Then Kale turned to the man, speaking urgently. The man nodded slowly, his shoulders slumping. He walked to Kale, placed a hand on his shoulder, and spoke words that were lost to the wind but visible in the movement of his lips. I offer myself willingly. The shadow detached from Kale completely. It flowed toward the volunteer, wrapping around him. The man didn't struggle. He stood straight, his eyes closed. The shadow tightened, and where it touched, the man's thermal signature began to fade. Not the violent, freezing death of the others, but a gradual dimming, as if he were being erased from reality itself. After a full minute, he was gone. Not even a body remained. The shadow, now saturated with the soul, pulsed with dark energy. Then it began to dissipate, unraveling into tendrils of darkness that faded into the night air. Kale stood alone, the paper still clutched in his hand. He looked at the spot where his follower had vanished, then at the bunker. His expression was unreadable, but Leo didn't need to see details to understand the emotion. Betrayal. Anger. Determination. Leo turned his attention to his next task. The ring was already analyzing another rule, one he had catalogued earlier but hadn't yet exploited. Rule detected, Sanctuary of Silence. Description: maintaining absolute silence for 1 continuous hour makes a location untouchable by shadow entities for 24 hours. Loophole: mechanical noise cancellation systems qualify if they maintain below 10 decibels. His bunker was already quiet, the soundproofing had been part of his luxury preparations. But absolute silence meant something more stringent in cosmic terms. Leo walked to the environmental control panel. With a few taps, he activated the bunker's secondary noise cancellation system, a network of speakers and microphones that actively countered any sound waves. The system hummed to life, consuming a small amount of fuel from his vast reserves, barely a drop in the ocean of his hoard. The control room grew quieter. Not just the absence of noise, but an active stillness that felt almost oppressive. Leo could hear his own heartbeat, the rush of blood in his ears. The usual background hum of electronics faded to nothing as the noise cancellation system neutralized it. On the monitor, the ring displayed a new status. Sanctuary of Silence, active. Duration, 1 hour remaining for activation. Protection, shadows cannot penetrate location for 24 hours post-activation. He watched the timer count down. 59 minutes. 58. Outside, Kale was gathering what remained of his supplies. The man moved with purpose now, no longer the desperate survivor but someone with a goal. He packed food, tools, weapons. He looked at the bunker frequently, his gaze lingering on the smooth metal dome. As the silence stretched, Leo found himself thinking about the volunteer. The man had offered himself willingly. Why? Fear of Kale? Belief in some twisted survival logic? Or perhaps he had simply seen no other way. Leo pushed the thought aside. Sentiment was a luxury he couldn't afford, not in this frozen world ruled by cosmic absurdities. The hour passed. The ring pulsed once, softly. Sanctuary of Silence, established. Protection active, 24 hours. Leo deactivated the noise cancellation system. The normal sounds of the bunker returned, the hum of generators, the whisper of air, the soft beep of monitoring equipment. It felt almost loud after the absolute quiet. On the monitor, Cale had finished packing. He stood at the edge of his camp, staring at the bunker. Then he did something unexpected. He raised his voice, shouting into the wind. The audio pickups caught fragments. "Won't forget this, sanctuary won't protect you forever, breach those walls, claim what's inside." He turned and began walking away, not into the wilderness, but along a path that led toward the frozen city on the horizon. As he disappeared into the swirling snow, Leo's ring pulsed again, this time with a different kind of alert. Distant signal detected. Location, Frozen City Grid Sector 7B. Nature, Resource Cache. Status, untouched by cosmic rule violations. Anomaly, rules do not apply within cache perimeter. Estimated contents, high-value supplies, possible technology. Warning, signal indicates recent activation. Leo leaned forward, his eyes fixed on the new information. A resource cache untouched by rules. That was impossible according to everything he'd observed so far. Cosmic rules governed reality itself, they weren't things that could be turned off in specific locations. Unless someone had found a way to create exceptions. Or unless the cache wasn't of this world. The signal pulsed on his map display, a steady beacon in the frozen city where Cale was now heading. Leo's mind raced with possibilities. Technology that could nullify rules. Supplies that existed outside cosmic law. A sanctuary even more secure than his bunker. He looked at his infinite storage ring, then at the monitors showing his vast hoard of supplies. Billions worth of resources, luxury items, survival gear. And yet, this signal promised something different. Something beyond mere material wealth. Outside, the wind howled, carrying ice and death. Inside, Leo began planning his next move. Leo stood before the panoramic window of his bunker's command center, watching the perpetual blizzard paint the world in shades of white and gray. The distant signal his ring had detected 2 days ago still pulsed in his awareness, a steady, almost imperceptible thrum that promised untouched resources in the frozen city ruins. On the monitor, thermal imaging showed Cale's heat signature moving steadily toward that same location. The man had survived the Shadow's claim, but at what cost? Leo's fingers traced the smooth surface of the infinite compliance ring on his left hand, its silver band cool against his skin. Time to move, he murmured to himself. The decision wasn't made lightly. Every excursion beyond the bunker's reinforced walls carried risks that multiplied with each new cosmic rule that manifested. But the cache represented something vital, supplies that might predate the rule system's activation, resources untouched by the bizarre edicts that now governed reality. Medicine that wouldn't demand blood offerings. Technology that wouldn't whisper secrets to the ice. In a world where every object could become a trap, untainted goods were worth braving the frozen hellscape. Leo moved through his bunker's living quarters with practiced efficiency. His heated survival suit lay waiting in the armory, a custom-designed marvel of insulation and flexible heating elements that could maintain core temperature at -50°C for 12 hours. He pulled it on, the material whispering as it sealed along magnetic seams. Over this went tactical webbing, pouches already stocked with emergency rations, medical kits, and the specialized tools his ring had suggested might prove useful, a compact salt dispenser, a frequency emitter tuned to frost wraith repulsion, a vial of liquid nitrogen for emergency ice crafting. His thoughts drifted to the salt as he checked the dispenser's reservoir. He'd hoarded it months before the freeze, pallets of industrial-grade sodium chloride purchased during his preparation frenzy. At the time, he'd thought it merely practical for melting ice on walkways. Now, with the ring's analysis revealing rule loopholes like sprinkling salt negates cracked ice summoning, those tons of salt had become strategic assets. The cosmic rules operated on symbolic logic, and salt's historical associations with purification and warding apparently translated into actual metaphysical weight. The garage door hissed open, revealing his modified expedition vehicle. It wasn't the luxury transport he'd once imagined using for apocalypse excursions. Those sleek designs had proven vulnerable to rule-based corruption. One prototype had developed a hunger for fuel rule that demanded literal blood in its tank. This vehicle was utilitarian, tracked instead of wheeled, with heating elements woven through its frame, and most importantly, minimal electronic systems that reduced rule interaction surfaces. Leo loaded crates of additional supplies into the rear compartment, more salt, spare batteries, and a portable forge unit for emergency crafting. Before departure, he spent 20 minutes configuring the bunker's automated defenses. Motion sensors calibrated to ignore wildlife but alert on human-sized heat signatures. Sound cancellation fields maintained at sanctuary of silence thresholds. And the rule monitoring system, which would ping his ring if any new cosmic edicts manifested within a kilometer radius. The bunker would be a silent, watching fortress in his absence. Stepping into the vehicle's cabin felt like entering a different world. The air held the sterile chill of preheated spaces, not the lived-in warmth of his home. Leo engaged the engine, and the tracks bit into the permafrost with a crunch that echoed through the soundproofing. Through the reinforced windshield, the world unfolded in monochrome devastation. Frozen trees stood like skeletal sentinels, their branches heavy with ice that glimmered with unnatural phosphorescence in the dim light. Buildings in the distance had collapsed under snow loads, their shapes softened into anonymous mounds. And everywhere, the evidence of rule violations, a frozen figure caught mid-stride, ice flowering from its mouth in a crystalline scream, a vehicle encased in what looked like amber but proved to be frozen honey when Leo's ring analyzed it, spilled sweetness attracts preservation, patches of ground that shimmered with geometric patterns where someone had stepped in forbidden sequences. Leo drove slowly, his eyes constantly scanning both the physical terrain and the ring's passive analysis. The device glowed softly on his hand, its light shifting through colors as it processed the cosmic rules saturating the environment. Most were background noise, minor edicts about stepping patterns or breath cloud shapes that posed little threat if avoided. But occasionally, something dangerous would flare in his awareness. An hour into the journey, the ring pulsed warm. Leo slowed the vehicle to a crawl as text shimmered in his peripheral vision, projected by the ring's interface directly onto his retina. Rule detected, stepping on cracked ice summons frost spiders. Context, applies to natural ice formations with fracture patterns resembling 8-pointed stars. Penalty, immediate manifestation of 3 to 5 frost spider entities. Loophole detected, sprinkling salt upon the ice before contact negates summoning properties. Ahead, the path crossed what had once been a small pond, now frozen solid. The ice bore a perfect 8-pointed fracture at its center, the cracks radiating with mathematical precision. Without the ring's warning, Leo would have driven right over it. He brought the vehicle to a full stop, the track settling into snow with a soft hiss. Opening the salt dispenser, he stepped out into air so cold it felt like breathing knives. The heated suit maintained his temperature, but his exposed face stung instantly. He moved carefully toward the fractured ice, his boots leaving deep prints in powder snow. At the edge, he knelt and sprinkled a handful of salt across the star pattern. The crystals glittered as they settled, and for a moment, nothing happened. Then the fracture lines began to glow, a sickly blue light that pulsed once, twice, before fading entirely. The ring confirmed the rule's neutralization. Leo returned to the vehicle, his breath pluming in clouds that the ring immediately analyzed for shape, acceptable, non-repeating spirals, before dissipating. He drove over the now safe ice, the tracks leaving parallel grooves in the salted surface. The city ruins loomed ahead, a jagged skyline of broken concrete and twisted metal. Leo had known this place before the freeze, a mid-sized urban center with warehouses along its industrial district. Now it looked like a graveyard sculpted from ice. He navigated by memory and the ring's directional pulse, avoiding main streets where collapsed buildings created treacherous chasms. Abandoned stores offered tempting distractions. Through shattered windows, Leo glimpsed shelves still stocked with canned goods, clothing frozen in display poses, electronics gathering frost. But his ring warned of rule contamination on most items, a can of soup that demanded a story in exchange for consumption, a winter coat that would remember its previous owner's sorrows, a radio that only played the songs of lost travelers. He took only what his ring confirmed as rule clean, a case of bottled water from a storage room, sealed before the freeze, medical supplies from a pharmacy's back stockroom, untouched by the healing demands equal pain rule that had contaminated the front shelves. Each acquisition went into the ring's infinite storage with a thought. The spatial pocket welcomed items without weight or volume concerns, organizing them according to Leo's mental cataloging system. He could feel the inventory growing, a comforting sensation of preparedness that contrasted sharply with the desolation outside. The cache's location proved to be a warehouse on the city's eastern edge, its corrugated metal walls mostly intact beneath snow drifts. What made it remarkable wasn't its preservation, but the complete absence of rule aura around it. While every other structure Leo had passed shimmered with the faint energy signatures of cosmic edicts, some dormant, some active, this warehouse sat in a bubble of metaphysical stillness. The ring's analysis showed only one rule active at the entrance, and it was a recent imposition, not something woven into the building's history. Leo parked the vehicle 50 meters back and approached on foot. The warehouse doors were sealed with a heavy padlock, frost-crusted but undamaged. As he drew closer, the ring pulsed again, projecting new text. Rule detected, Guardian of Greed demands tribute. Context, applies to sealed storage facilities containing resources valued above threshold. Penalty, immediate soulbinding to location for attempted theft. Loophole detected, offering counterfeit item of equal perceived value satisfies Guardian. Additional, Guardian perceives value through symbolic weight, not material authenticity. Leo studied the doors. Now that he knew to look, he could see the faint shimmer in the air before them, a distortion like heat haze, but cold instead of warm. The Guardian rule wasn't visible to normal sight, but it was there, waiting. Counterfeit item. Equal perceived value. Symbolic weight. His mind raced through possibilities. The ring's loophole analysis suggested the Guardian operated on metaphorical logic common to many cosmic rules. It didn't want actual treasure, it wanted the idea of treasure offered in proper form. And what was more symbolically greedy than gold? Returning to the vehicle, Leo retrieved the portable forge and a container of purified water. He set up a small work area sheltered from the wind, the forge humming to life as its heating elements glowed orange. Using a gold bar from his storage as a mold, one of hundreds he'd purchased during his preparation phase, he poured water into the impression, then flash froze it with liquid nitrogen. The result was a perfect ice replica of a gold ingot, crystalline and gleaming. Leo examined it critically. To mundane inspection, it was obviously frozen water. But to a rule entity that perceived symbolic weight, the shape screamed wealth. The coldness echoed preservation of value. And the material, water, the source of life, carried its own metaphysical weight in this frozen world. He approached the warehouse doors again, the ice gold bar cradled in gloved hands. At 3 meters distance, the air before the doors solidified into a visible barrier, a wall of shimmering force that resolved into the shape of a massive, multi-eyed entity composed of frozen light. The Guardian of Greed. It had no mouth, but a voice echoed in Leo's mind, cold and grasping, tribute. Leo extended the ice gold bar. An offering of equal value. The Guardian's many eyes focused on the counterfeit. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then one elongated limb, made of crystallized avarice, reached out and took the ice bar. The entity examined it, turning the frozen water this way and that. Leo held his breath, his hand hovering near the frequency emitter in case this triggered a different rule violation. Accepted, the voice echoed. The symbol suffices. The Guardian dissolved back into shimmering air, and the metaphysical pressure around the warehouse lifted. The padlock on the doors clicked open of its own accord, falling into the snow with a soft thump. Inside, the warehouse was a treasure trove untouched by the freeze's worst effects. Climate control had failed, but the insulation had kept temperatures merely below freezing instead of apocalyptic cold. Shelves stretched into darkness, stacked with crates marked with pre-freeze corporate logos. Leo's flashlight beam swept across labels, antibiotics, surgical equipment, server racks, solar panel components, water purification systems. All of it rule clean according to his ring's analysis. He worked methodically, loading crates into his infinite storage. Each acquisition felt like a victory against the decaying world. The medicines alone represented survival for years, not just for him, but as potential trade goods if he ever chose to engage with other survivors. The technology could upgrade his bunker's systems, making them more resistant to rule corruption. And all of it came without cosmic strings attached. As he lifted the last crate, a heavy container of rare earth magnets useful for electromagnetic shielding, a sound echoed through the warehouse. Not the groan of settling ice or the howl of wind, but the crunch of boots on frost. Leo turned, his ring already pulsing a warning. Kale stood in the doorway, flanked by 3 new survivors Leo didn't recognize, a woman with ice-crusted hair and 2 men whose faces bore the gauntness of recent starvation. They looked rougher than Kale's original group, more desperate. Scavengers he'd picked up in the ruins, perhaps. But it was the device in Kale's hands that drew Leo's attention. It looked like a jury-rigged piece of technology, wires and crystals and what might have been a salvaged smartphone screen, all encased in ice that glowed with internal light. And as Kale raised it, Leo's ring flickered, its steady analysis stuttering into fragmented bursts of information. "Found you," Kale said, his voice raspy from cold and what might have been recent screaming. "Your little drone messages. Your rule tricks. Did you think I wouldn't track the only vehicle moving through this frozen hell?" Leo remained still, calculating. The new survivors spread out, blocking exits. Their weapons were crude, ice axes, a pipe with nails driven through it, what looked like a frozen leg bone sharpened to a point. But numbers mattered, especially if his ring's analysis was being disrupted. "That cache is mine by right of discovery," Kale continued, stepping forward. The device in his hands hummed, and Leo's ring pulsed erratically, its projections fragmenting into nonsense glyphs. "And your cheat ends here. This disruptor breaks rule analysis. No more loopholes. No more easy survival." He smiled, a cracked-lipped expression that held no warmth. "Now let's see how you fare in the real world." The device in Kale's hand emitted a low, pulsating hum that seemed to vibrate through the frozen air itself. Leo felt the infinite compliance ring on his finger twitch, its familiar warmth turning erratic. The golden glow that normally highlighted cosmic rule loopholes in his vision, the subtle shimmer around frost wraith nests, the faint text-like patterns in the ice, blurred into a chaotic smear of colors. For the first time since his rebirth, the ring's analysis function glitched, leaving him momentarily blind to the hidden clauses governing reality. Kale's smile was a thin, cruel line against his frostbitten face. "Surprised?" he called out, his voice carrying over the howling wind that whipped through the ruined warehouse district. "Found this beauty in an old research lab. It doesn't just disrupt your pretty ring, it scrambles any rule analysis within 50 meters. Leo's mind raced even as his body moved on instinct. He was standing exposed between his armored snow vehicle and the stacked crates of medical supplies he'd just looted from the Guardian of Greed's cache. The frozen ground beneath his boots was treacherous with hidden rule traps, cracks that might summon frost spiders, patches of black ice that could trigger temperature inversions. Without the ring's guidance, every step was a potential violation. He glanced at Kale's 3 new followers. Mara, the ice scavenger, had her eyes locked on Leo's vehicle, calculating its worth with the desperate hunger of someone who'd been picking through frozen corpses for weeks. Jax, the starving survivor, trembled visibly, his gaze darting between Leo and the crates of food supplies visible through the vehicle's reinforced windows. Ran, the desperate fighter, held a makeshift spear of sharpened rebar, his knuckles white with tension. "You thought you were the only one who could play with the rules," Kale continued, taking a step forward. The disruptor device, a crude assembly of wires, circuit boards, and what looked like crystallized frost, glowed with an unnatural blue light. But broken interpretations can be weaponized too. Leo didn't respond. Instead, he focused on the ring's erratic feedback. Even through the disruption, he could feel it trying to analyze, to adapt. The sensation was like trying to read through water, the information was there, but distorted, shifting. He needed time. Time the frozen wasteland wasn't going to give him. He moved toward his vehicle, keeping his movements deliberate. The snow crunched under his boots, each sound amplified in the sudden silence that had fallen between Kale's words. His mind catalogued everything, the distance to the driver's door, 8 meters, the position of the crates, 3 meters to his left, the way Mara's eyes tracked his every motion. When he reached the vehicle, he didn't bother with the door. Instead, he placed his hand against the nearest crate of medical supplies. The ring, despite its glitching, still functioned as storage. With a thought that felt like pushing through mental static, he willed the crate into the infinite space. It vanished, not with the usual smooth transition, but in a jerky, stuttering disappearance that left afterimages in the air. Kale's smile faltered. "Still showing off." "Just being efficient," Leo said, his voice calm despite the adrenaline coursing through him. He moved to the next crate, then the next. Each storage action was slower than normal, requiring more concentration as he fought through the disruptor's interference. The ring felt heavy on his finger, its warmth now alternating between hot flashes and chilling cold. As he worked, part of his mind focused on the ring's struggling analysis. Through the blur of distorted information, patterns began to emerge. The disruptor wasn't just random technology, it operated on a cosmic rule itself. The ring was trying to parse it, to break it down into the same structured clauses that governed frost wraith summoning or shadow claims. He stored the last crate just as Kale raised the disruptor again. Enough games. The cash is mine now. And so is whatever's in that vehicle of yours. Leo slid into the driver's seat, his movements fluid despite the tension coiling in his muscles. The vehicle's engine roared to life, a deep, reassuring sound in the frozen silence. Through the bulletproof glass, he watched Kale approach, the disruptor held like a weapon. Then the ring's analysis broke through. The information came in fragments, piecing together in his mind like a shattered mirror reassembling itself. The disruptor operated on a rule he'd never encountered before: technology against rules incurs backlash. Simple, brutal, cosmic law. And the loophole was equally straightforward: if the disruptor was used near a rule-bound entity, it attracted double the penalty. Leo's eyes scanned the frozen landscape beyond the warehouse. His memory, sharpened by a decade of preparation, recalled the map of this district. 200 meters northeast, an old refrigeration plant. During his initial surveys before the freeze, he'd noted it as a potential frost wraith nesting site. The architecture created perfect echo chambers for whispers to ice, and the residual cold would be attractive to the eldritch entities. He gunned the engine, not away from Kale, but toward him. The vehicle surged forward, its massive tires churning through snow and ice. Kale stumbled back, surprise flashing across his face. For a moment, Leo thought he might activate the disruptor right there, but no, Kale was too cautious, too aware of his own vulnerability. Instead, Kale shouted to his followers. "Stop him." Mara was already moving, her ice scavenger's agility letting her leap onto a frozen dumpster, then onto the vehicle's roof. The thud of her landing echoed through the cabin. Jax and Ren spread out, trying to flank the vehicle from both sides. Leo didn't slow. He aimed for the narrow alley between two collapsed buildings, knowing the vehicle's reinforced frame could handle the passage. Mara scrambled on the roof, trying to find purchase on the smooth, ice-coated surface. Through the sunroof's reinforced glass, Leo could see her desperate eyes. He reached the refrigeration plant just as the ring's analysis completed. The building loomed ahead, a massive structure of rusted metal and broken windows, with icicles hanging like teeth from its roof. Even from here, he could feel the wrongness of the place. The air was colder, the silence more profound. And in the shadows between collapsed machinery, shapes moved, pale, shifting forms that drank the light. Frost wraith nest. Active. Leo slammed on the brakes, the vehicle skidding to a halt just 30 meters from the plant's gaping entrance. Mara lost her grip and tumbled from the roof, landing in a heap of snow. She scrambled up immediately, her eyes wide with realization of where they were. Kale and his other two followers caught up, breathing heavily in the thin, frozen air. "What are you doing?" Kale demanded, his gaze darting to the refrigeration plant. He understood the danger, his experience with whispering to ice had taught him what frost wraith nests looked like. "Showing you something," Leo said, rolling down his window just enough for his voice to carry. "Your disruptor works on a cosmic rule. Technology against rules incurs backlash." Kale's eyes narrowed. He looked at the device in his hand, then back at Leo. So there's a loophole." Leo kept his voice even, conversational. "Use it near a rule-bound entity, and it attracts double the penalty." For a long moment, Kale just stared. Then understanding dawned, followed by rage. "You led us here." In that moment of anger, Kale made his mistake. He raised the disruptor, thumbing the activation switch. The blue glow intensified, pulsing in time with Leo's erratic ring. The device hummed louder, the sound vibrating through the ice beneath their feet. Nothing happened at first. Then the frost wraiths emerged. They didn't come one by one. They came in pairs, pale, humanoid shapes that seemed woven from ice and shadow. Their movements were wrong, joints bending in impossible directions as they flowed from the refrigeration plant's darkness. The air temperature plummeted further, Leo's breath frosting instantly on the windshield. The disruptor had summoned two of them. Double the normal attraction. Kale stared in horror as the wraiths focused not on Leo, not on the nest they'd been lured from, but on him. On the source of the disruption. The cosmic rule was exacting its price. "Run!" Mara screamed, already backing away. But Jax froze, his starving body unable to respond quickly enough. One of the wraiths reached for him, its touch leaving frost patterns spreading across his jacket. He didn't scream, the cold was too complete, too absolute. He simply stiffened, then collapsed, his body hitting the ice with a sound like breaking glass. Ren tried to fight. He thrust his rebar spear at the second wraith, but the weapon passed through the entity as if through mist. The wraith turned its featureless face toward him, and Ren stumbled back, his desperation turning to terror. Kale was already running, the disruptor still glowing in his hand. The wraiths pursued, their movement silent and relentless. Leo watched through the windshield, his hand steady on the steering wheel. The ring on his finger was cooling now, its analysis function finally stabilizing but weakened, like a muscle strained to its limit. He put the vehicle in reverse, backing away slowly. The scene unfolded before him like some frozen tableau, Kale disappearing between ruined buildings with a wraith closing in, Mara helping Ren to his feet only for another wraith to emerge from the plant's shadows, Jax's body already being encased in a cocoon of ice. When he was a safe distance away, Leo turned the vehicle and began to drive back to his bunker. The journey felt longer than usual. Without the ring's full analysis, every shadow in the frozen city seemed threatening, every crack in the ice potentially rule-bound. He found himself relying on memory instead of cosmic insight, remembering which streets he'd previously mapped as safe, which buildings he'd marked as hazard zones. The ring's feedback was minimal now. It could still store and retrieve items, but the loophole detection, the glowing highlights, the clause analysis, was muted, requiring conscious effort to access. And even then, the information came slowly, like trying to hear a whisper through thick glass. The disruptor's backlash had drained it, forcing a cooldown period he could feel in the metal's diminished warmth. He reflected on the vulnerability as the bunker's familiar hill came into view. For years, he'd relied on the ring's passive analysis. It had been his edge, his cheat in a world gone mad with cosmic laws. Now he'd experienced what it was like to be nearly blind to those laws, to stand in the frozen open with only his wits and preparation. The feeling was uncomfortably close to his first death, freezing alone in the ice age that had claimed the world. The bunker's entrance appeared ahead, its reinforced steel doors a welcome sight against the endless white. But as he approached, something felt wrong. The doors were slightly iced over, not with the normal frost accumulation, but with patterns that seemed too symmetrical, too intentional. Swirls and spirals of ice crawled up the metal, glowing with a faint, eldritch light that pulsed in time with his heartbeat. Leo brought the vehicle to a stop, the engine idling. He stepped out into the deepening cold, his breath pluming in the air. The ice patterns weren't natural. They looked like writing. Like the cosmic rules themselves, but twisted, corrupted. He raised his hand to the door, the ring on his finger suddenly flashing, not its usual golden glow, but a sharp, urgent red. The alert pulsed through his mind, clear and terrifying despite the ring's weakened state. Bunker integrity rule violated, eldritch infiltration imminent. The words hung in the air, more real than the freezing wind, more certain than the ice under his feet. Something had gotten inside. Or something had been invited in by a rule he hadn't accounted for. And whatever it was waiting for him behind the doors he'd designed to be unbreachable. The heavy steel door of Leo's bunker sealed shut behind him with a resonant clang that should have been comforting. Instead, the sound was swallowed by the unnatural silence that had settled over his sanctuary. He stood in the entry chamber, his breath visible in the frigid air that shouldn't have been there. The temperature display on the wall read -5 degrees Celsius, 20 degrees colder than when he'd left. His eyes swept across the familiar space. The reinforced concrete walls, the redundant power systems, the shelves stocked with enough supplies to last decades, all of it felt suddenly fragile. Frost patterns crept along the floor like silver veins, originating from the ventilation shaft in the far corner. They weren't the geometric patterns of normal ice crystallization. These formed intricate, disturbing sigils that seemed to shift when he looked away. Leo's hand went to the infinite compliance ring on his finger. The metal was cold, colder than it should have been. He focused on it, trying to activate the passive analysis function that had become as natural as breathing. The ring glowed faintly, a pale blue light that flickered like a dying star. Images flashed in his mind, fragmented, disjointed. A rule about echoes. Something about uninvited presences. Then static, like a corrupted data stream. Still recovering, he thought, his jaw tightening. The rule disruption device Kale had used wasn't just a temporary inconvenience. It had wounded the ring's connection to the cosmic rules themselves. He moved deeper into the bunker, his boots crunching on the frost. The living quarters were worse. Here, the frost had climbed the walls, forming crystalline structures that resembled grasping hands. The air smelled of ozone and something else, something ancient and cold that had no business being inside his fortress. Then he heard them. Whispers. They came from everywhere and nowhere, soft as falling snow, yet they carried weight. They weren't words in any language he recognized, but their meaning seeped into his consciousness anyway: hunger, cold, emptiness. The kind of emptiness that consumes warmth and memory and hope. Leo activated the bunker's internal scanners. The holographic display flickered to life, showing thermal readings. Cold spots moved through the walls, following the ventilation system. They weren't living beings, they were absences, voids where heat should have been. Eldritch infiltrators, just as the ring had warned. He retreated to his command center, the heart of the bunker. Here, the frost hadn't penetrated yet, protected by additional layers of insulation and his own rule compliance measures. He sat before the main console, his fingers flying across the keyboard. Security logs scrolled across the screen. The breach had occurred exactly 17 minutes after he'd left to confront Kale at the warehouse. While he'd been dealing with frost wraiths and rule disruption devices, something had slipped through his defenses. The Sanctuary of Silence rule he'd exploited earlier had expired, leaving a vulnerability he hadn't anticipated. The ring pulsed weakly on his finger. He focused all his will on it, pushing through the static. Slowly, painfully, words formed in his mind. Sanctuary must have no uninvited echoes. Violation detected. Penalty, eldritch infiltration. Loophole analysis in progress. Leo waited, his breath held. The whispers grew louder outside the command center door. Frost began to form around the seals. Loophole identified: if the invader is named aloud with IT's true title, IT is banished. True title. The words echoed in his thoughts. He had no idea what these entities were called. The ring wasn't providing that information, its analysis function was still too damaged. He accessed his personal logs, the records he'd kept since the freeze began. Every cosmic rule he'd encountered, every loophole he'd exploited, every entity he'd observed. He scrolled through entries about frost wraiths, shadow entities, the guardian of greed. Nothing matched. Then he remembered. Earlier, during his first week in the bunker, he'd intercepted a faint radio signal, a dying transmission from some other survivor. Broken words about silent hunger and things that eat warmth. He'd logged it as potentially useful, then forgotten it in the chaos of survival. He found the entry. Dated 3 weeks ago. The transmission had contained a fragment of a rule: Eldritch Infiltrator responds to the silent hunger. Was that a title? Or just a description? The temperature in the command center dropped another 5 degrees. The holographic displays flickered. Frost crept under the door, those silver sigils glowing with faint, malevolent light. Leo made a decision. He stood, his body tense. He walked to the door, his hand hovering over the release mechanism. The whispers were deafening now, promising endless cold, the cessation of all motion, the perfect stillness of the grave. He opened the door. The main chamber was transformed. The frost had grown into intricate, beautiful, terrifying sculptures, frozen waves crashing against invisible shores, trees of ice with too many branches, faces formed from rime that wept frozen tears. And in the center of it all, a presence. Not a shape, but a concentration of cold so intense it warped the light around it. Leo took a deep breath, the air burning his lungs. He raised his voice, putting all the authority he could muster into the words. "I name you," he said, the sound echoing in the frozen chamber. "The silent hunger." For a moment, nothing happened. The cold intensified, sharp enough to feel like knives against his skin. The whispers became a chorus of denial. Then the ring on his finger flared, not the weak flicker from before, but a brilliant, steady blue light. The analysis function, pushed to its limits by his direct confrontation with the rule violation, finally stabilized. Confirmed, the ring whispered in his mind. True title: the silent hunger. Banishment protocol activated. The frost didn't melt. It didn't retreat. It simply ceased to be. One moment the intricate ice sculptures filled the chamber, the next they were gone, leaving only damp patches on the floor and walls. The temperature began to climb, the environmental systems finally overcoming the unnatural cold. The whispers faded into nothingness. Leo stood there, breathing heavily. The immediate threat was gone, but the vulnerability remained. The ventilation shaft still showed signs of the breach, the metal was warped, as if frozen from the inside out. He spent the next 6 hours repairing it. He pulled materials from his infinite storage, titanium plating, insulation foam, sealants that could withstand absolute zero. He worked methodically, his hands steady despite the adrenaline still coursing through him. Each weld, each seal, was checked and rechecked. He couldn't afford another breach. When the physical repairs were complete, he turned to the rule compliance systems. His bunker had been designed with cosmic rules in mind, but clearly his defenses weren't comprehensive enough. He accessed the main power grid, rerouting energy to the scanning arrays he'd installed in the walls. The systems hummed to life, casting invisible fields throughout the bunker that would detect any rule violations in real time. It cost him a day's worth of fuel reserves. A significant expenditure, but worth it. His hoard was vast, but not infinite. Every resource spent was one less day of survival in the long term. The calculation was simple: better to spend fuel now than lose everything to an eldritch infiltrator later. As the scanners came online, Leo turned his attention to the data he'd gathered from Kale's rule disruption device. During their confrontation, his ring had managed to capture fragments of information before glitching. He uploaded the data to his main console. Analysis revealed disturbing details. The device wasn't something Kale had built himself. The components were scavenged from multiple sources, but the core technology, the part that interfered with cosmic rule analysis, bore markings Leo recognized. They were the same symbols used by a faction he'd heard rumors about but never encountered directly: the rule breakers, survivors who didn't just exploit loopholes but actively tried to dismantle the cosmic system itself. Kale had allied with them. Or at least acquired their technology. Which meant Leo's list of enemies had just expanded from one desperate survivor to an entire faction with unknown capabilities. He was pondering this new threat when the communications array chimed. An incoming broadcast, on a frequency he hadn't heard before. Strong signal, powerful transmitter. Leo activated the receiver. Static crackled, then cleared to reveal a voice. Deep, resonant, filled with absolute certainty. "And so the weak perish," the voice said. "They cling to their broken rules, their pathetic loopholes. They don't understand that true power comes not from following the system, but from bending it to your will." The transmission was coming from the geothermal zone 50 miles to the north. Leo knew the area, hot springs that had kept a small region habitable even as the rest of the world froze. He'd considered claiming it himself, but the distance and unknown dangers had made it too risky. "My name is Gorith," the voice continued. "I control the warm lands. I have tamed the frost wraiths, turned the shadow entities into guardians. The survivors here serve me, not out of fear, but out of gratitude. I have given them warmth in exchange for their obedience." Leo's eyes narrowed. Gorith. The name wasn't in his records. A new player, one who had not only survived but thrived. "The cosmic rules are not chains," Gorith said, his voice growing louder, more intense. "They are tools. And I have learned to wield them. My scouts have told me of a hoarder in a fortified bunker to the south. A man who thinks his stockpiles make him safe." A chill that had nothing to do with temperature ran down Leo's spine. "He doesn't understand," Gorith continued. "Resources mean nothing without the power to defend them. And I have that power. I have studied the rules, found weaknesses even the cosmic system doesn't know exist." The transmission crackled with energy. Leo could almost feel the arrogance radiating through the speakers. "So listen well, hoarder," Gorith said, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper. "Enjoy your supplies while you can. Bask in your false security. Because soon, very soon, I'm coming for you." A pause, filled only with the hum of the transmitter. "The geothermal zone is just the beginning. Your bunker will be mine. Your resources will fuel my empire. And you will serve as an example of what happens to those who think hiding is the same as surviving." The transmission cut off. Leo sat in the sudden silence, his hands resting on the console. The scanners hummed softly, green lights indicating no current rule violations. The bunker was secure, repaired, reinforced. He had survived an eldritch infiltration, analyzed a new threat, and learned of a warlord with ambitions that stretched all the way to his doorstep. Outside, the world continued to freeze. But inside his bunker, Leo began to plan. Gorith thought rule manipulation was about power. Leo knew better. It was about survival. And he had been surviving this apocalypse since before it even began. He looked at the ring on his finger, now glowing steadily once more. Then he turned back to the console, pulling up maps of the geothermal zone, resource inventories, weapon schematics. The game had just changed. And Leo intended to win it. The bunker's control room hummed with the low thrum of life support systems, but Leo's attention was fixed on the holographic map glowing before him. Goritha's geothermal zone pulsed like a feverish wound on the frozen landscape, a patch of warmth in a world of ice, and according to the intercepted broadcast, a prison built on rule manipulation. Leo traced the northern perimeter with a finger, the motion leaving a faint trail of condensation on the screen. His infinite compliance ring rested comfortably on his hand, its surface now clear and steady, the glitching from Kale's disruptor device fully healed. The faint golden glow it emitted when analyzing rules had returned to its normal, reassuring pulse. He'd spent the last day preparing. The bunker's drone bay, a chamber he'd stocked with surveillance equipment during his 10-year preparation, now housed 3 modified quadcopters equipped with thermal sensors and rule-compliance scanners. Leo ran a final diagnostic, his breath fogging in the chilled air of the bay. The temperature inside the bunker was a comfortable 18 degrees Celsius, but he kept certain areas cooler to preserve fuel, a reminder of the cost of yesterday's repairs. The reinforced ventilation grates and new rule-compliance scanners along the corridors had consumed a day's worth of fuel reserves, but the security was worth it. No more uninvited echoes. Time to see what Gorith has built, Leo murmured to himself, his voice echoing softly in the metallic space. He activated the drones one by one, watching through their camera feeds as they slipped through the bunker's secondary exit, a narrow shaft disguised as a frozen rock formation. The world outside was a study in monochrome brutality. Wind howled across ice-sheathed ruins, carrying crystalline dust that glittered under a pale, distant sun. The drones ascended, their rotors fighting the bitter gusts, and began their survey of the geothermal zone. The zone itself was a marvel of cosmic contradiction. Steam rose in thick plumes from fissures in the earth, creating pockets of relative warmth where the ice had melted into slushy mud. Leo could see makeshift structures clustered around the largest steam vents, crude shelters built from salvaged metal and frozen debris. But the warmth came at a price. The drone feeds revealed strange, hulking shapes moving through the steam, stone golems, their bodies formed from volcanic rock and geothermal clay, animated by some unseen force. They moved with a slow, grinding purpose, patrolling the perimeter of Goritha's territory. Leo's ring pulsed warmly. Text shimmered in his vision, superimposed over the drone feed, cosmic rule detected, steam breath animates stone golems. The analysis unfolded like a scroll of golden light. Rule description, where geothermal steam meets carved stone, guardians awaken to defend the heat source. Violation, disturbing the steam flow without offering tribute. Loophole, offering a gemstone to the first golem encountered pacifies all guardians in the immediate area for 1 solar cycle, ***. A smile touched Leo's lips. He'd hoarded gemstones during his looting sprees, not for wealth, but because his ring had hinted they might have rule-based uses. Now he understood why. He selected a small, flawless sapphire from his infinite storage, feeling its cool weight in his palm. The drones continued their survey, mapping the golem's patrol patterns. There were 6 of them, each standing nearly 3 meters tall, their stone limbs scraping against the frozen ground as they moved. The first golem, according to the drone's thermal imaging, guarded the main approach, a narrow path between 2 steam vents that led directly into the heart of Goritha's base. Leo suited up carefully. His thermal suit, lined with advanced insulation, would protect him from the external cold, but the geothermal zone would be a mix of extremes, freezing winds battling pockets of scalding steam. He checked his equipment, the sapphire in a secure pocket, a compact scanner linked to his ring's analysis function, and a sidearm loaded with conventional rounds. Rule manipulation was his primary weapon, but he wasn't foolish enough to go unarmed. The journey north took 2 hours of cautious travel. Leo moved through the frozen city ruins, avoiding areas his ring flagged as rule traps. He passed the warehouse where he'd faced Kale's ambush, the ice there was stained dark with old blood, and frost spiders skittered away from his path as he sprinkled a pinch of salt, a leftover habit from earlier explorations. The ring's guidance was precise, highlighting safe routes with faint golden trails only he could see. As he approached the geothermal zone, the temperature shifted unpredictably. One moment, the wind cut like knives, the next, a gust of steam would wash over him, hot and damp, fogging his visor. The stone golems came into view, their silhouettes looming through the mist. The first golem stood at the entrance path, its body a rough-hewn mass of basalt and obsidian, with glowing fissures where geothermal energy pulsed like molten blood. Steam hissed from joints in its stone, coiling into the frigid air. Leo's heart hammered against his ribs. He could feel the ring's warmth intensifying, its analysis confirming this was the key guardian. He approached slowly, his boots crunching on the icy ground. The golem didn't move, but its stone head turned slightly, empty sockets fixing on him. Leo reached into his pocket, withdrew the sapphire, and held it up. The gem caught the pale light, gleaming with an inner blue fire. An offering, Leo said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. He placed the sapphire at the golem's feet. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the stone guardian shuddered, a deep grinding sound echoing from within its chest. The glowing fissures dimmed, and the golem settled into a crouch, its animation ceasing. Around the zone, the other golems slowed, then stilled, becoming mere statues once more. The ring's analysis updated, loophole activated. Guardians pacified for approximately 24 hours, ***. Leo let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. He moved past the dormant golem, into the heart of Goratha's territory. The base was a grim spectacle. Survivors, perhaps 24 of them, labored under the watchful eyes of armed guards. They broke ice from the steam vents, hauling it to crude furnaces where it melted into drinking water. But Leo's ring immediately flagged the horror, these people were being forced to violate cosmic rules. He saw one woman spill salt near a steam vent, within seconds, a frost wraith coalesced from the mist, and the guards laughed as she scrambled away. Another man whispered to the ice, and shadows deepened around him, though no entity fully manifested, yet. Leo found a concealed vantage point behind a collapsed geothermal pipe, its metal rusted and frozen. From here, he could observe Goratha's central compound, a fortified structure built around the largest steam vent, its walls reinforced with scrap metal and rule-bound sigils carved into the ice. Gorath himself emerged periodically, a hulking figure in fur and armor, his face scarred, his eyes cold as the deep freeze. He moved with the confidence of someone who believed he'd mastered the rules. But Leo's ring told a different story. As he watched, it pulsed again, and new text unfolded, major cosmic rule detected, heat source demands a weekly blood oath. The analysis deepened, revealing layers. Rule description, any who benefit from this geothermal heat must swear a blood oath to its guardian spirit each week. Violation, denial results in spontaneous combustion. Loophole, if the oath is taken with frozen blood, the demand is nullified, and the oathgiver gains temporary immunity from heat-based rule penalties, ***. Leo's mind raced. He scanned the compound, and his ring highlighted a specific area, a freezing chamber where victims were bled, their blood collected in ice molds. One such victim, a young man with hollow eyes, was being dragged back to the labor pens, his arm bandaged. Leo waited until the guard's attention shifted, then slipped from his hiding place. He approached the freezing chamber, a small shack built over a natural ice fissure. Inside, he found what he needed, a tray of freshly frozen blood cubes, each the size of a die, gleaming darkly in the dim light. He took one, storing it carefully in an insulated case. The ring confirmed, frozen blood sample acquired. Loophole exploitable, ***. For another hour, Leo gathered intel. He noted the guards' patrol patterns, the locations of supply caches, and, most importantly, Goratha's reliance on a particular rule, whispering to steam grant strength. Gorath would periodically whisper to the central vent, and his guards would momentarily grow more aggressive. But the ring highlighted a vulnerability, the whisper had to be in a specific rhythm, any deviation attracted shadow entities. Leo memorized the pattern, filing it away for future use. He was about to retreat when his ring flashed a warning. Scout patrol approaching. Detection risk high, ****. Leo froze, pressing himself against the frozen pipe. Two of Goritha's scouts, men in patched thermal gear, carrying modified rifles, were moving toward his position. They weren't following his trail, they were on a routine sweep, but their path would bring them within meters of him. Leo calculated his options. He could try to slip away, but the terrain was open here, with little cover. The golems were still pacified, but they wouldn't help him now. He decided to wait, his breath shallow. The scouts passed within 10 feet, their voices low and gruff. Another oath-breaking today. Goritha's getting restless, one said. The heat's fading faster. He needs that bunker south, the other replied. They moved on, and Leo began his retreat, step by careful step. He retraced his path past the dormant golems, the sapphire's effect still holding. The wind picked up, howling through the steam vents, and the temperature dropped sharply as he left the geothermal zone. He was almost to the safety of the ruins when his ring pulsed violently, not with analysis, but with a sharp, urgent warning. Alert, pursuit detected. Cosmic rule triggered, rule of escalation, monsters multiply. Leo spun. Behind him, the two scouts had doubled back, and they weren't alone. For more figures emerged from the steam, Goritha's enforcers, heavily armed. But worse, the rule was taking effect. From the shadows between the ruins, frost wraiths began to coalesce, their forms shimmering into existence. 1, 2, then 4, their numbers growing with each passing second. And among them, darker shapes stirred, shadow entities, drawn by the escalating conflict. One of the scouts raised a rifle. He's here. The bunker rat. Leo didn't hesitate. He broke into a run, his boots skidding on ice. His ring blazed with golden light, analyzing the new rule in real time. Rule of escalation: any pursuit in this territory causes monster numbers to increase exponentially based on distance covered. Loophole: unknown, insufficient data, ****. The frost wraiths screeched, a sound like cracking glaciers, and surged forward. The shadows deepened, reaching with insubstantial claws. Goritha's men opened fire, bullets pinging off frozen debris. Leo ducked behind a collapsed wall, his heart pounding. He could hear the monsters multiplying, more wraiths, more shadows, their forms blotting out the pale light. The chase was on, and the rules had just turned deadlier. The frozen canyon walls rose like jagged teeth around Leo, their icy surfaces reflecting the pale light of a sun that offered no warmth. His breath came in ragged clouds, each exhalation a visible reminder of the deathly cold that sought to claim him. Behind him, the sounds of pursuit echoed, the crunch of boots on snow, the guttural shouts of Goritha's enforcers, and something worse, the whispering skitter of frost wraiths multiplying in the shadows. Leo pressed his back against a sheer ice face, his gloved fingers tracing the smooth surface of the infinite compliance ring on his left hand. The band glowed with a soft, steady pulse, its analysis function working overtime. He'd been running for what felt like hours since the geothermal zone, his lungs burning with each frigid gasp. Goritha's scouts had been relentless, and the rule of escalation they'd triggered was doing exactly what its name promised. For every minute of this chase, another monster spawned from the frozen landscape. He risked a glance around the ice formation. A dozen figures in mismatched winter gear advanced through the canyon's narrow pass, their breath steaming in the air. Among them moved darker shapes, frost wraiths with their crystalline bodies that seemed to drink the light, and shadow entities that flowed like oil across the snow. One of Goritha's men, a burly survivor with a crude spear, pointed directly at Leo's hiding spot. There. The hoarder, the man shouted, his voice echoing off the canyon walls. Leo's mind raced. His bunker lay miles to the south, through terrain now crawling with monsters. The ring's storage held supplies enough for months, but out here, exposed, he was vulnerable. He focused on the ring's analysis, watching as text shimmered in his vision, the same rule he'd observed during his escape, rule of escalation: monsters multiply during pursuit. The glowing text expanded as the ring worked, revealing clauses beneath the surface rule. Leo's eyes narrowed as he read. For every continuous minute of active pursuit by a sentient being, one additional monster of equivalent threat level spawns within visual range of the pursued. Then came the exception, glowing brighter than the rest: if the pursuer voluntarily ceases pursuit for a full 60 seconds, the escalation counter resets to 0. A plan formed, cold and precise. Leo's fingers tightened around the small communication device he'd scavenged weeks earlier. He activated its broadcast function, his voice calm despite the adrenaline coursing through him. "Goreth," he called out, the device amplifying his words through the canyon. "Your pride's showing. Chasing one man with an army. The great warlord needs monsters to do his dirty work." The advancing figures hesitated. One of them, Leo, recognized him as the scout who'd first spotted him at the geothermal zone, lowered his weapon slightly. The frost wraiths continued their advance, their forms shifting and multiplying even as Leo watched. Another shadow entity coalesced from the darkness between two ice pillars, bringing the count to what Leo estimated was 15 monsters now. "You think taunts will save you, hoarder?" Goretha's voice boomed back through a speaker system. The warlord himself appeared at the canyon's entrance, a massive figure in reinforced furs, his face obscured by an ice-rimmed respirator. "Your bunker will be mine. Your supplies will feed my people. Your corpse will be a warning. Then come claim it," Leo shot back, his eyes never leaving the ring's display. The escalation counter ticked upward, 18 monsters now. "Unless you're afraid to face me without your multiplying pets. Call off your dogs for 1 minute. Let's talk terms like men, not monsters." Silence fell, broken only by the wind whistling through the canyon. Leo could see Goretha's hesitation, the warlord's pride warring with his caution. The man had built his faction on rule manipulation, on appearing invincible. To back down now, even temporarily, would be a show of weakness before his followers. "You have nothing to offer," Goreth finally said, but his hand came up, signaling his men to halt. The enforcers stopped advancing. The frost wraiths and shadow entities continued their approach for another few seconds before seeming to lose direction, their movements becoming sluggish. Leo watched the ring's counter. 50 seconds passed. 55. A frost wraith drifted within 10 feet of his position, its crystalline form reflecting his own tense expression. At exactly 60 seconds, the ring flashed green. The escalation counter reset to 0. The newly spawned monsters, those that had appeared in the last minute, dissipated like mist, leaving only the original dozen that had been chasing him. The immediate threat had halved. Now came the second part of his plan. Leo's other hand dipped into his coat pocket, fingers closing around the vial of frozen blood he'd collected from the geothermal zone's victim chamber. The ring had analyzed the zone's major rule: heat source demands a weekly blood oath. The loophole: frozen blood nullified the demand if offered during a moment of thermal transition. As Goreth opened his mouth to speak again, Leo acted. He uncorked the vial and pressed the frozen blood sample against the canyon wall, where geothermal warmth still seeped through from the nearby zone. The ring glowed brighter, analyzing the interaction. False blood oath initiated, text scrolled across Leo's vision. Thermal beneficiary status, temporary recognition granted. For 3 heartbeats, nothing happened. Then the ground trembled. Deep beneath the ice, something shifted. The geothermal warmth that fed Goretha's zone surged, diverted by the false oath's recognition. Steam erupted from fissures in the canyon floor, billowing upward in great white clouds. Ice melted instantly where the superheated vapor touched it, creating torrents of meltwater that cascaded down the canyon walls. "What have you done?" Goreth roared, his voice barely audible over the hissing steam. Leo didn't answer. He was already moving, his ring activating its storage function. As Goretha's forces stumbled backward from the steam explosion, men shouting, monsters recoiling from the sudden heat, Leo swept his hand in and arc-dropped weapons vanished into his ring's infinite space: spears, crude firearms, even a rule disruption device similar to Kale's that one of Goretha's lieutenants had been carrying. The steam cloud expanded, creating a thick white curtain between Leo and his pursuers. He turned and ran, not toward his bunker, but deeper into the canyon's side passages, routes he'd memorized from drone scans. His boots splashed through newly formed streams of meltwater as he fled, the sounds of chaos fading behind him. It took him 2 hours to circle back to his bunker's entrance, moving with cautious precision through frozen ravines and over ice bridges. Twice he had to hide from patrols, Goretha's men, now disorganized and searching in smaller groups. The ring's analysis function remained active, but no new monsters spawned. The escalation had been broken. When the familiar bulk of his bunker's disguised entrance came into view, Leo allowed himself a moment to lean against the ice-covered door, his breath coming in exhausted puffs. He entered the code sequence, watching as the heavy steel door slid aside with a hiss of compressed air. Warmth enveloped him as he stepped inside, the climate-controlled environment of his sanctuary a stark contrast to the frozen hell outside. He sealed the entrance behind him, engaging all security protocols. Only then did he let the tension drain from his shoulders. In the bunker's main control room, surrounded by monitors displaying external camera feeds and rule analysis logs, Leo reviewed what had happened. The ring projected data into the air before him, records of the rule of escalation, loophole exploitation, the false blood oaths effects, the thermal surge that had disrupted Goratha's forces. He cross-referenced it with earlier data, from Kale's disruption device to the geothermal zone's rules. A pattern emerged in the analysis. Cosmic rules weren't just random edicts, they had layers, exceptions within exceptions, like a legal code written by a mad god. Each loophole he'd exploited revealed another layer beneath. The ring logged this new understanding, storing it alongside hundreds of other rule interactions he'd recorded. Leo spent the next hour inventorying what he'd taken from Goratha's men. The weapons were crude but serviceable. The rule disruption device interested him most. It was more advanced than Kale's, with components that hummed with residual cosmic energy. He placed it in a shielded containment unit for later study. As he worked, a notification flashed on his main monitor. External sensors detected reduced activity around Goratha's geothermal zone. Patrols had been pulled back. The warlord's broadcasts had gone silent. Leo's maneuver had done more than just let him escape, it had weakened Goratha's hold, shown his followers that their leader could be outmaneuvered. The regional balance had shifted. Satisfied, Leo turned to review his primary hoard, the vast storage rooms filled with food, medicine, fuel, and luxury items that represented 10 years of preparation. He walked through the aisles, his footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. Canned goods stacked to the ceiling, medical supplies in climate-controlled lockers, fuel tanks connected to the bunker's generators. This was why he'd been reborn, to have this, to survive where others perished. He was examining a pallet of solar panels when the ring on his finger pulsed violently, not with its usual analytical glow, but with a deep, crimson light he'd never seen before. At the same time, the air in the bunker grew heavy, charged with something that made the hair on Leo's arms stand up. He turned slowly. On the far wall of the storage room, where smooth concrete should have been, lines began to etch themselves into the surface. Not scratches or cracks, but precise glyphs that glowed with the same crimson light as his ring. They formed words in no language Leo recognized, yet their meaning burned directly into his consciousness. The message completed itself, shimmering against the wall: the hoarder has exploited 100 loopholes, the rulemaker takes notice. Leo stared, his breath catching in his throat. The ring's analysis function went wild, projecting streams of data that scrolled too fast to read. But one line remained clear, superimposed over the glowing message: signal source detected, cosmic origin, entity class designation pending. Outside, the wind howled against the bunker's walls. Inside, the message continued to glow, a silent testament that his victories had drawn attention from something far beyond the frozen world.